There was a lane of the Harbour Bridge that was shut down by a protest where a truck came to a complete stop. The protester was facing 9 months, possibly up to 18 months in prison for it.
Has some more nuanced takes than what you'd expect from the Republican Party, where they kind of deal in, cliches and quotes, and they're beholden to all of their donors.
Other countries in the world have much more advanced coal-fired power stations running high temperatures with lower pollution than ours are.
Before we start today's episode of the Aussie Wire, it gives me great pleasure to announce not one, but two winners of VIP double passes, that's 2 passes per winner, to see Donald Trump Jr. in Australia. The names are on the screen right now. Entry was exclusively for our Aussie Wire insiders, and our winners will of course be getting an email very soon letting them know that yes, it's true, you've won. Insiders get giveaways, discounts, bonus content, and our insiders community. Right now, we're running an Ask Me Anything, and before the next episode of the Aussie Wire News on Thursday, we'll be giving away a double pass to the Friedman Conference in Sydney. The giveaways, discounts, and bonus content just keep coming for our insiders. So if you've missed out on the chance to win these Donald Trump Jr. VIP double passes, worth $590 per double pass, then make sure you become an Aussie Wire insider today so you don't miss out again. Link is in the description. Welcome once again to the Aussie Wire. Today I want to encourage you to beware of the voices of fear. The voices that disempower you, that make you want to run or hide or give up on the fight. Just be wary of them. There's an amazing thing happening right now where more people than ever before are realizing that they can't trust the people they've always trusted their whole life. The media, politicians, experts, government. Australians, we like to talk a big game. We claim to be skeptical. We claim to be oh so cynical. But fundamentally, Australians are actually ridiculously trusting. And most Australians have had a rock-solid, unshakable trust in our institutions for our whole lives. Until now. Every day, thousands of Australians, and indeed hundreds of thousands of people around the world, are having that awful epiphany, waking up with that horrible realization that the people they trusted most have lied to them, or at best, have been completely incompetent and undeserving of their trust, at best. People are realizing that what they used to believe isn't true, but they haven't had a chance yet to really figure out what is true. And in that moment of change, in that moment of letting go of what you used to believe, it's very easy to get swept away by an overwhelming tide of fear. Sadly, there are people who use fear to gather audiences to themselves, people who use fear-mongering to get your attention and to keep it for their own personal gain. And there's a lot of vulnerable people who are right at this very moment, looking around for the very first time in their lives and asking themselves who they can trust, who is telling the truth. Most of us trusted the media and government by default. We never decided to trust them, we just did because, well, didn't everyone? And when that trust is betrayed and people realize they've been lied to, they find themselves, as grown adults, having to actually decide who to trust for the first time in their lives. They're not doing it by default anymore. They actually have to make a decision. And as they look around, feeling betrayed and let down, the voices of fear are often the ones that cut through the noise and seem, in that moment, to make the most sense. And that's because fear is an easy thing to sell. Despair is easy to spread. It's all hopeless, they control everything, elections are rigged, selected not elected, anyone who appears to be decent is just called controlled opposition, they wouldn't be allowed to get where they are if they were actually any good, and on it goes, a depressing spiral of lies that will drive you mad if you let it. Fear and hopelessness are easy to sell. That's why those voices cut through. You know what's hard? What takes actual work, time, skill, is communicating truth, freedom, and hope. It's myth-busting the hopelessness and despair, shining a spotlight onto the cause of freedom and bringing hope through action and dedication and hard work. The truth is that they don't control everything. They can barely control each other, let alone the whole world. Yes, they're trying to, Yes, they've made their plans and they're implementing them, and we do need to work quickly and with unity to counter their plans. But this is how it is in every battle. The attacker moves first. They've made their plans, they've put their resources in place, they've got their allies and their agents and their moles, and it takes time for the people being attacked to realize they're being attacked. And after that, it takes time for the defenders to organize, for the freedom fighters to find each other, to gather their allies and their resources and put in place plans for a counterattack. It takes time. In 2020, with the arrival of the coronavirus, we saw an attack on basic freedoms unlike anything we've witnessed in over 75 years. And yes, it's easy to look at what we're up against and turn to fear and despair. Yes, those who seek to take our freedoms have weaseled their way into positions of power. Yes, they have rich and powerful allies. Yes, they've had time to make their plans and put in place their strategies and ensure that they have allies all over the world. All of that is true. But the same is true of every attack in history. And we know from history that attackers often fail. Why? Because although the defense may be delayed, although it may take time for the defenders to organize and begin their pushback, when that day comes, everything changes. The whole of mainland Europe was lost to the Nazis in World War II before the pushback actually began. There were voices of fear and despair back then also, and they would have sounded like the voices of reason. Let's negotiate, make a truce. We can't possibly overcome the might of an army powerful enough to occupy the whole of mainland Europe and North Africa. The voices of fear and despair were far louder and would have seemed far more reasonable than the voices of hope and courage. They would have seemed far more reasonable than the voices of despair sound today even. And yet they were still wrong. The reason Hitler was defeated is because there were people who refused to give in to that fear and despair. And those people found each other and got organized and formed alliances, made plans. And in the case of World War II, they put their very lives on the line to overcome that evil. Thankfully, in our case, the stakes are far lower, at least for now. But our task is the same. Do not listen to the voices of fear. I know the sense of betrayal is strong. When you first realize that you can't trust the people that you've trusted all your life, I know that fear is an easy sell. It has a strange and compelling attraction, especially when you're vulnerable and unsure what to believe or who to trust anymore. But just be wary of the voices of fear. Despair takes a soldier out of the fight just as surely as a bullet does. And those who spread fear do far more to help the people they're telling you to be fearful of than they do to help their listeners. There are good people in the world doing good things. I said in late 2022 that this year, 2023, would be the year when the pushback started in earnest. And I believe we're already seeing that. Here at the Aussie Wire, we'll be bringing you coverage of some of the most exciting developments as we enter the second half of the year. But everywhere we look, from the highest levels of international organizations to social media to entertainment industry to the manufacturing industry even, the pushback is on. And if you're not seeing it yet, then perhaps you need to switch off the voices of fear for a little while and take a good look around. Because good things are happening. Good people are rising up. And all it takes for you to become one of them is to turn away from the voices of fear and start joining in. Truth, freedom, and hope. That's what we're about here at the Aussie Wire. And I can tell you, it's a lot more fulfilling than lies, fear, and despair. And if you don't believe me, try it sometime. Now, here's the news. Well, yesterday we saw the deliberate blockading of ports and infrastructure in Brisbane, in Newcastle, in Melbourne by this group calling themselves Blockade Australia. And this is an area where I must confess I am genuinely torn. I don't like to see disruption. I think it's disrespectful. I think it's rude. And I think one person being able to shut down critical infrastructure is a terribly bad idea and a bad way to run a country. On the other hand, I've personally been on the receiving end of the abuse of anti-protest laws when I was standing up against lockdowns in Victoria. So I have to confess, this is an area where I'm not entirely sure where I come down on how such disruptive, intentionally disruptive protests should be handled. So I decided to turn to someone who has observed probably more protests than any other individual in Australia. And I'm talking about Chris Debruyn, who has kindly come on, Chriscoveries, who's kindly come on as our Sydney correspondent here. Chris, now, this is the first time we've seen your face here on the Aussie Wire, but you did that fantastic and very well received segment for us all about the closure closure of the Liddell power plant and its impact on power prices. So for those of you that haven't seen the face, just know that you have enjoyed some amazing content from Chris. Now, Chris, we've got some images here of these protests going down. Like I said, Brisbane, Newcastle and Melbourne simultaneously being blockaded and shut down, often by individuals or extremely small groups of people. Help me to think through this because, like I said in my intro, I genuinely don't know how I feel about what to do in these sorts of situations.
If you're looking for moral judgment, well, it's a show of force. It's a show of force of what they're doing here. That they have people within their group willing enough to put themselves in imperiled situations, and that's hard to find. It's one thing for someone to click share on Facebook and be like, I really believe in this cause because I clicked like, or I'll throw $5, $100.
Yeah.
You're willing to put their bodies on the line like that. This is proving the belief in their cause.
Sure.
It's the same with, this is any protest movement. Are you willing to get out of your chair and into the streets? And in this case, this isn't just into the streets. This is above the streets. This is in the way of choppers, fire, at truck, and very particularly at a port. So they weren't, unlike Just Stop Oil, which I'll refer back to a few times, which disrupts motorways, this is blocking ports, this is blocking the businesses. So then it turns to us to try and, in your situation, go, well, where do I stand?
Yeah, what's the right thing to do?
Kids can still get to work. We're not blocking down roads in the city, but we're blocking ports, which could be goods. This is tough, and happy to talk it through with you.
Yeah, so this is personal because I'm still fighting criminal charges from in my opinion, the abuse of incitement laws in Victoria because I was encouraging people to, and this is important, peacefully and non-disruptively, non-destructively exercise their human right to protest against the lockdowns that occurred in Victoria. I actively, and I've got video evidence of this, I actively worked against people that wanted to do property destruction or unnecessary disruption or these sorts of things. I always felt that we should stay off the road until there were so many of us that we really had no choice. And only then would we actually allow ourselves to block a road. This is a different beast, though. This is a very small number of people they're not actively protesting, they're actively obstructing. They're actively getting in the way. This is their intent. Now, we've seen some South Australian laws that have tried to apply very, very high penalties to anyone that engages in obstructive protest. I really find it very, very difficult to get behind those laws. I had a conversation with Rukshan just a few weeks ago trying to just begin the process of drilling down into this. You've watched more protests than possibly any other person in Australia. You've covered an enormous number of protests. Take me back a year or so because there's a protest that you brought to my attention on this as well.
No, this would, if you're talking about when I covered Blockade Australia previously last year, that was confrontational, where you had a group of people without a schedule, without informing the police, occupy a road and step into the middle of it. And I was there for it. This was the second week of protests, and they were quite determined in what they were doing. When we first got there, they were more media than protesters. I found the entire situation a little bit absurd because you've got these protesters clearly about to occupy a road and knowing what they're going to do. A gentleman yelling the power of Christ compels you
which is extraordinary.
While a media swarm goes around them. Look, it's protests are a wild, funny place, and that's why I cover them. But this group is clearly about to occupy a road, which without police permission, you can't just do that, is normally the rule, right? And what we followed is we went down the streets, we wait for the lights to turn green, ridiculously enough. We wouldn't want to break those rules. But as we wait for the lights to turn green, they step into the streets. And I diffuse it before we get down there, but it wasn't diffused before we get down there. The blockade group of, I don't know, anywhere between 40, 50, 30, something. Then occupied the road with the same measures they had the week before. Now, something I mentioned from the week before's protest is that they hadn't just occupied the road, they were pushing those large orange blockades into the middle of it. And in fact, one of them had been struck by a car. So this is confrontational stuff. This is not COVID lockdown, you need to go home kind of stuff. This is standing in Hyde Park kind of approach. We don't agree with it. It's you have an unauthorized protest and you're going to disrupt while it's there. So the group that is there, you can call them progressive if you like, but what they're most there is to try and cause disruption for attention. Does that lead to wide public support? Media certainly love it because the old rule, if it bleeds, it leads, works in news media, which is why you see more media here than protesters and why all eyes today were on people willing to put themselves in danger for it.
Yeah.
I'm not sure it's going to be winning public hearts and minds, but the change of tack from rather than blocking roads for people where they're going to ports and trying to hit businesses instead, well, it's not as, it doesn't get the public as offside as do streets, roads, and city streets.
It may backfire less, I guess, is one way of looking at it. Look, this is genuinely a difficult thing for me. I watch what's happening here and I think about my own time on the streets of Melbourne and how out of control things got. You used the phrase there for a moment ago, unauthorised protest. The very idea that protests need to be authorised is something that raises my hackles, because I know for a fact that the Victorian government was never going to authorise any of the protests that I engaged in Victoria against the lockdowns. The very principle of free speech is that it doesn't require the authorisation of the government of the day. Often you will be speaking against the government of the day. So there's many areas where I look at these people and I go, I disagree with their particular position. I disagree with the policies that they're advocating for, but I will defend their right to advocate for it. Until they cross into this intentional disruption, this is where I really struggle. At what point does it cease to be political speech and a freedom of speech issue? And at what point does it simply become vandalism and public nuisance?
Yeah, I think that all depends on polling. I think that all depends on the local population. At what point does it? There's plenty of protests that could happen in a park. There's plenty of protests that could happen on a footpath.
Yeah.
It all depends on this flow down from polling. Tends to be police policy, how the police see it. And in your state is very different from our state. New South Wales actually did pass some laws somewhat similar to South Australia.
Okay.
They passed laws about blocking ports. They passed laws about blocking major thoroughfares. And last year, during that same Blockade Australia, there was a lane of the Harbour Bridge, in fact, it may have been two, that was shut down by a protest where a truck came to a complete stop. The protester was facing 9 months, possibly up to 18 months in prison for it. Charges were later dropped after a public furor and media got wind of it. But we have similar laws to that of South Australia. They're just going a lot further. What to do with that kind of unauthorized protest tag? Individual morality. Ultimately, what it comes down to is how much disruption are you willing to tolerate? Because in Melbourne, you have I've been on a tram down there, and the tram just came to a full stop, and he's like, I got to get off, mate. And I'm like, what? Yeah. And you're like, there's a protest up ahead. I'm like, is this normal? Does it happen? Yeah, it happens all the time, mate. All the time. So they have protests all the time in Melbourne. Yeah. But they tend to have to go through Victoria Police, and Victoria Police becomes the arbiter of what is and is not an authorised protest.
Yeah, very, very tricky territory. And I began my coverage of this with Rukshan a few weeks ago, talking about the South Australian laws. We continue my coverage of this with you, and I'm very grateful for your time tonight, Chris. This is a tricky one, and we're going to continue to talk about this because I think this is an area where, for me, free speech is an absolute human right. We must not be messing with free speech, but there is a point where you cross over from speech into something entirely different. And I think talking about where that line is, disagreeing about where that line is, and really working through that issue is an important one for us as we move forward. So, Chriscoveries, thank you so much for your time today, and we look forward to having you back again on the Aussie Wire in future.
Thanks, Topher. See you next time.
Well, if you believe the headlines and the hype, this green energy revolution is going to be good for humans, good for the planet, good for everything and everyone. But there are some people in some parts of the world who might have a slightly different perspective on this green energy revolution, specifically people working in slave conditions to make solar panels and to mine minerals for batteries, etc. I'm joined once again by Joanne Nova, our science correspondent. Thank you very much for coming on, Joanne.
Always a pleasure.
Now, this is something that you've known about for a very long time. I've known about for a long time. Anyone paying attention has known about this problem for a very long time. But there's recently been a new voice that has come out and really raised a surprising voice, if I'm honest, and is raising the alarm on this issue.
In terms of slavery, it's great to see people finally joining some dots. So, yes, Australian philanthropist Grace Forrest, who is the son of the famous Forrest you're thinking of, as in Twiggy Forrest, has set up a group, and this is about 5 years ago. They've been putting reports out about the risks of slavery around the world, and so really interesting. Apparently, solar panels are now in their top 5 products produced by slaves, and we're talking about especially people in Xinjiang. I probably said that incorrectly, in China, where the Uyghur re-education camps are. And, you know, where are the Greens on this? Where are the people who want to save the planet and are trying to protect the spotted quoll, but they're not too concerned about people in forced labor camps in China? And then, of course, there's all the children in the Congo, you know, a different kind of slavery. The 12-year-olds working barefoot in cobalt mines in the Congo, where most of the cobalt comes for the batteries.
Well, you mentioned the Greens. I had an astonishing experience when I was in Tasmania last year, and I had a situation where Bob Brown was on television, and I'm sitting there watching television. I don't normally do that, but I had nothing else to do. I'm watching television, and Bob Brown was there doing a puff piece all about this green energy revolution. And he was saying that we needed to have this revolution that involved all these wind turbines and solar panels and batteries, grid scale battery storage and all of this. And he acknowledged that we needed enormous amounts of resources for this green energy revolution, but we shouldn't increase mining in Australia in order to get those resources. So the interviewer asked him and said, well, where should they come from? And my jaw hit the floor as I heard him answer and say, well, we should get it from Africa. There is a blindness here. This is a party, and these are people that pride themselves on caring about human rights until it comes to this green religion. It's astonishing.
Oh, and I'm all for, you know, jobs for Africa, but we're talking about shifting industries to Africa with no concern at all, or China, no concern at all about working conditions, about the pollution made there. It's like, I just don't want it in my backyard, you know. Let's see, I thought the atmosphere was a global thing, not just a local one, you know. So it is preposterous, it is hypocritical, and it is ridiculous. And, you know, we need to screw down the other side who keep putting conservatives on their defenseless, you know, kind of defending their turf, when really they're the ones who are pushing for action, which is already killing people. In fact, I think that was the last few words of the article I wrote was Miss Forrest said, you can't harm people to save the planet. And Joanne Nova says, well, they're already harming people to save the planet, and they probably won't save anything either. So, you know, what's wrong with boycotts? And in this case, perhaps it's time to start talking about boycotting solar panels from China, because I want to draw attention to the point that 84% of the world's solar panels are now made in China. And as we know, quite a lot of these are coming from Xinjiang and the Uyghur concentration camp areas. And to me, it's just extraordinary. And it's no accident that 84% are coming from China, because, of course, countries which don't use coal-fired plants as much, those who are running on solar power, can't afford to make solar panels, and their industries have all been priced out. They've all left and they've all gone to China. So if you use renewables, you can't make renewables. I mean, there's a big message in there. And what we've got is China busy consuming all of these production, the manufacturing, the jobs. It's all shifting over there, the knowledge, the IP, everything. And then we're buying back. We're supporting this industry. We keep this running. For what? You know, people used to argue that we've got to discount solar panels, solar industry and whatnot so that it becomes economic. Because if we put enough money in now, R&D will solve all the problems with it, and it will be cheap in the future. But you think about it, who's going to own the patents on those solutions? The people in China, because we're effectively subsidizing their industries now so that they can produce cheaper solar panels for us. And we're just the dumb luckies at the end of the scheme here, pumping the money in.
And if that argument works so well for renewable energy, let's just invest lots of money, R&D, and it'll become better and better. Well, that same argument would work for fossil fuel-based energy generation, which has been getting better and better, is so much more efficient in terms of output versus the amount of fuel consumed or the amount of emissions out of the smokestack.
Topher, don't get me started. Another day we will have to talk about the fact that we could get high-energy, hot coal plants in Australia that are something like like, I think, between like 10 and 20% more efficiently. So there's an instant CO2 saving if you do that, and you still have reliable energy. But no one's even talking about that.
Yeah.
Other countries in the world have much more advanced coal-fired power stations running high temperatures with lower pollution than ours are. It's kind of crazy. Why are we waiting, hoping that we'll catch up to Indonesia or China one day?
I love that little cartoon that's gone around a few times. It shows a guy in the electric chair waiting to be executed, and over his shoulder you can see these windmills sitting up on the top of a hill, and there's a guy standing there, a guard standing next to him with binoculars, like, oh, here it comes! I can see the puff of wind. I can see it coming. It's funny, but this is the future that we've made for ourselves. Our industry waiting for a puff of wind.
Very sardonic humour you've got going there, Topher. Boy, whew. That's yes, it is. It's crazy, but it is really interesting to see where this one's coming from. And yay, that someone is drawing attention to the solar slavery industry. And now, can we start talking about the cobalt industry and EV batteries?
Yeah.
And then can we maybe talk about the fact that there is not enough minerals in the world, that we just haven't got enough, even remotely close, to be able to power this net zero revolution, which we've signed off. It's like Anthony Albanese believes we can sign these things off, and with a flick of a pen, you make stuff happen. All this nickel, the cobalt, it's all just going to bing. All you have to do is write the legislation for it, right?
Well, Joanne, I'm going to have to stop you there because you are once again talking far too much sense. Joanne Nova, thank you very much for joining us once again on the Aussie Wire.
You're wonderful, Topher. Thank you.
Well, there's a few events that I refuse to miss every single year, only a handful, and one of them is a thing called the Friedman Conference. You could be forgiven for wondering, well, what's that? I've never heard of it before. Well, you and about 25.5 million other Australians have also never heard of it before. It's essentially the Libertarian Conference in Australia. It's put on by the Australian Libertarian Society and the Australian Taxpayers Alliance, but don't take my word for it that it's an unmissable event. I've got Barclay McGain from the Australian Taxpayers Alliance here with me to tell us all about it. Now, before we go to you, Barclay, I will remind our viewers we're giving away 2 tickets. The Aussie Wire is giving away 2 tickets to the Australian Taxpayers Alliance and Australian Libertarian Society Friedman Conference. It's hosted in Sydney every single year. I will be there only for a half day, Barclay, and it's killing me because I have to then switch to being on the Donald Trump Jr. tour. Tell me, what am I going to miss out on by not being there for the whole conference this year?
Well, g'day, Topher, and thanks for having me on. Yes, we do have a smorgasbord of speakers this year. So it runs over 3 days, 7th to 9th of July at the Aerial Function Centre in UTS in Sydney. Generally not a favourable place for libertarian ideas and free thought, but we certainly make it there. It's our little hive mind for a 3-day period. So it runs over 3 days, as I said. On the Friday night, we've got a bit of a student-style conference, and then on the Saturday, we focus more in on separate political issues. So we go from panel to panel. Some will be on harm reduction and talk about drug legalization. We've got some others based on freedom of speech, some others talking about the COVID period. I know you've been quite outspoken on that, obviously, with your documentary Battleground Melbourne, which premiered last year at the conference. And then on Sunday we focus on a number of other issues like woke capitalism. That's another big topic that people are interested in hearing on. So the theme of this year's conference is definitely taking on people who've risen to the challenge of rising up on the right side of politics in the face of seemingly every institution not going our way. So, we've got a great lineup, yourself included, Topher. But I'm really looking forward to it. It should be great, bringing together a couple hundred of the nation and indeed the world's best libertarian minds. So looking forward to it.
So libertarianism, this might be a new word for some people. In a nutshell, in sort of what's the best you can do of a one-sentence description? They say if you get 2 libertarians into a room, they'll have 3 different definitions of what a libertarian is, right? Okay, so this is a contentious issue. I'm asking you to step on a landmine here, Barclay, but do the best you can. What is a libertarian?
I think fundamentally libertarians believe in getting the government out of your life. And now that obviously to most people's minds, it takes place in the social realm, allowing people to live the life the way they want. But it also takes on a very economic side. And that's where the economic conservatism kind of begins to come in. And that is, both of them are large incursions in our day-to-day life. I mean, we saw during the COVID era, that was more of the freedom of movement, the freedom to interact with others, and of course the medical freedom. But economically, I mean, we've seen the growth of government, grow largely over the last 50 years. It's actually quite exponential. And it's happening at a state and a federal level. And that's something where, we had the Friedman Conference, we discussed these ideas, and, we've even had a lot of people who were previous attendees of the Friedman Conference now be elected into Parliament. And I think David Limbrick is a shining example of that down in Victoria. And he was essentially the de facto opposition leader during the time, given how weak the Liberal Party opposition was there against Daniel Andrews down in the state of Victoria. But, we've got a number of shining lights. And again, as I mentioned before, it's international. We've got Spike Cohen coming. He was the Libertarian Party vice presidential candidate at the 2020 presidential election. And I mean, they're the third largest political party in the United States, supposedly the shining hallmark of all democracies. And, it's a great opportunity to have someone like him there who, has some more nuanced takes than what you'd expect from the Republican Party, where they kind of deal in, cliches and quotes, and they're beholden to all of their donors. You can genuinely be sure that Spike is someone who, when he speaks, he's speaking his mind. And, they were able to achieve an admirable result at the 2020 election. So, he's going to be definitely a headline act.
Look, one of the questions people are asking me quite a lot, because I'm best known now for my work during COVID, even though I'd already been a political commentator and somewhat of an activist for 10 years before COVID came along. People ask me, well, what's next? What do we do now? Most of the, not all, but most of the mandates have fallen away. Most of the restrictions have fallen away. What do we do now? And I'm telling people about, well, we need to actually make it so that what just happened can't happen again. And that's not about picking a side of politics, left versus right. I think both of those sides actually like big government. They just want it to behave in a certain way and use its power in their direction. Whereas a libertarian, which I am as well, says, well, the government shouldn't have that power in the first place. What can people expect coming to a conference like the Friedman Conference? It is Australia's premier libertarian conference. But a lot of people say, what's the point of a conference? Just a bunch of people talking. Why would someone come along?
Well, I think as you pointed out at the beginning of the show, it's not the case that we all just go around in a room and nod heads with each other and say, oh, yes, I concur. I concur. I agree. As you pointed out, there's an array of views on the libertarian aisle. You've got some people who are coming who, are pretty unashamedly call themselves conservatives. And when they hear the idea of small government, they're kind of like, well, I kind of want the government to dictate some part of my life, and they believe in the state. And then you've got the other spectrum, which is the full-on anarchists or the anarcho-capitalists. And then you've got people, I assume, like yourself and myself, who I guess you could say are minarchists or even some kind of small state there to protect our individual liberties. And that is truly what I believe the rights and responsibility of the state is. So, you've got a really big spectrum, and you actually do end up having a number of debates. And I know one of the debates that we're having this year is about the constitutional monarchy. Obviously, we've just had the coronation of King Charles III, and there's I guess a bit of a rift on the right side of politics, or indeed libertarian politics, about whether having this old system of an outdated monarchy is indeed upholding the system of freedom and libertarianism, or whether a shift to a republic would actually result in worse incursions on freedom and libertarianism. So that's going to be a very interesting and topical talking point, I think, this year. And of course, the voice to Parliament. I think you'll find that there is far less of a rift in the room on a topic like that, because fundamentally we are all about judging the individual and the rights of the individual. And you'll see that, the voice to Parliament from head to toe is all about groupthink. So we're pretty resolutely opposed to that. But I think you'll find the reasons why we should be opposed to that obviously do differ. So there's a lot of room for discussion. It is certainly not an echo chamber. And we do have a variety of speakers who fundamentally do disagree with each other, but they all can come together, have a drink. And that's the thing. It's not just a battle of ideas. It very much is a social occasion on the Saturday night. We are hiring out a boat that cruises the Sydney Harbour. And that's going to be a very fun-filled night. So it's not all academic rigor, Topher.
And I'm going to miss that fun-filled night because I'll be at the Donald Trump Jr. dinner the night before the Donald Trump Jr. event in Sydney. So unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to partake in the best of the fun, but I am speaking at the conference on the Saturday morning. So if for no other reason, can I encourage you, grab yourselves a ticket. If someone wanted to find out more, if someone wanted to grab a ticket, Barclay, where would they go?
Yep, so they can go to the Australian Taxpayers Alliance website. It's australiantaxpayersalliance.org.au, and they can follow the links to our website. There is a number of ticketing options, all the way through to the VIP swanky kind of option, to like the cheap student or volunteer option, or just general attendee. We really do cater to all types, and there's a number of discount codes out there. I believe we might even have one prepared for the Aussie Wire, and if we don't, we certainly will have one prepared. And if you're lucky enough, hey, there's 2 tickets being given away by this show, so make sure you pay attention to that.
Well, Barclay, you've plugged it perfectly. We are giving away 2 tickets to our insiders. The link to become an insider is going to be in the description of this video. There will, for those that don't win the tickets, be a discount code. You can get 20% off the cost of a ticket. If you're an insider, you've got to be in the insiders to be able to get that code from us. Look, Barclay, it is always fun. It's a shame that I'm going to miss most of it this year because of I can't be in 2 places at once. But believe me, if I could be, I would be there. Absolutely, for sure. And I do look forward to seeing you there. And hopefully lots of our viewers will be coming along as well. Thank you so much for coming on the Aussie Wire.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Topher, and thanks for all you do. I love the Aussie Wire. It's a great experiment. So go well.
Thanks, mate. Thank you for watching the Aussie Wire. Make sure you become an Aussie Wire insider so you don't miss out on the chance to win more giveaways and prizes. Link is in the description. Plus, as an insider, you get discount codes, bonus content, and our insiders community. We release new episodes of the Aussie Wire News every Tuesday and Thursday at 4 p.m. You can catch up on past episodes at theaussiewire.com. Also, remember to join our email list and read our blogs while you're there, and follow us on all the socials. My name is Topher Field, and this is the Aussie Wire.